1 minute, I'll share my screen. So as we already know that elicitation is more about discovering the new requirements by making suitable conversation with the stakeholders like end users, clients, trade unions, domain experts, and the people who are involved in maintaining the system to explore about what are the constraints under which the system is going to be implemented and what kind of hardware setup will be used to host the system. So during if they discuss such things with the end users and other stakeholders, they can discover new requirements. And such an exercise is called as requirements elicitation. Sometimes it is also called as requirements elicitation or requirements discovery. So that's the reason it is also called as requirements discovery phase. It involves technical staff working with customers to find out more about application domain, the services that the system should provide, and the system's operational constraints. See, when they discuss with the end users, what they'll come to know. So, what are the requirements of the end users? So, once the technical staff comes to know what are the requirements of the end users, so then it becomes easy for them to understand. So what kind of services have to be implemented, and they'll check the document, what are the requirements already listed, and if there is anything missing, that can be added. That is requirements discovery. Similarly, not only with the end users, the technical team will also discuss with the domain experts and within the people within the business. So overall, the people using that particular software, maybe the trade unions, etc. With all those people, the discussion should be done to discover if at all there are any missing requirements. Software engineers work with a range of systems stakeholders to find out about the application domain, the services that the system should provide, the required system performance, hardware constraints, other systems, and etc. That means, see, the requirements may emerge out of the hardware constraints. Say, for example, uh, say we say that if you want to use Windows 10, we assume that minimum 4 GB RAM must be there, isn't it? And minimum 180 GB hard disk should be there. Like that, we'll start assuming, like, so this is the ideal hardware requirement that we should have in case if we are going to install Windows 10. Similarly, like that, in case of any software, okay, it is better to know, say for example, being a company, if you develop some software and at the client place, what kind of system configuration then they are going to have, and how we need to design, then what is their performance expectations, that also you need to get the information about. And all these things are divided into different stages. Requirements elicitation is divided into different stages. That is, the first stage is called as the requirements discovery. That is, during this phase, immediately after the discussions with various stakeholders, they'll try to discover any missing requirements. If any requirements are found, maybe the requirements are related to providing new functionalities, or maybe uh, regarding providing better performance, or any other non-functional requirement. It can be any requirement. Okay, such things will be added to the requirements document. And the second phase is requirements classification and organization. So once you get the requirements, you can segregate them. So these are the domain requirements, these are the user requirements, these are the non-functional requirements, these are the functional requirements. Like that, you can segregate and organize the document so that it looks comprehensive. And the third phase is requirements prioritization and negotiation. Requirements prioritization is very important, especially when you go with iterative development. When you go with iterative development, the software will be delivered in terms of iterations. So therefore, you need to prioritize which are the requirements having the highest priority so that that can be implemented as the requirements for first iteration. Then the last step is requirement specification. So once the prioritization and negotiation is done, then finally you'll freeze the document, and that freeze document is nothing but requirements specification document. Now let us see what are the problems with requirements elicitation. See, the major thing that we do as part of requirements elicitation is to discover the requirements. We'll be discussing with the stakeholders, isn't it? Now we cannot assume that all the stakeholders are intelligent enough to say what kind of service they need. When we take an example of any project, there will be so many types of stakeholders. So some may be very like having a lot of knowledge about what they need and what they don't want, so they can give very good feedback, but you cannot expect the same with all other stakeholders. So therefore stakeholders may not know what they really want. Some of the stakeholders, if not every stakeholder, at least some of the stakeholders may not know what really they want. Then stakeholders express requirements in their own terms, isn't it? See, we cannot expect that all the stakeholders are IT people, isn't it? We cannot expect all the end users of the system to be the IT guys. So therefore, when you ask them what is your requirement, they may tell the requirements in their own way. But it is up to you how to understand and how to document it. Different stakeholders may have conflicting requirements. See, conflicting requirements means, say, for example, for one stakeholder, some functionality may be required, and for some other person, that is not at all required. So that is called conflicting requirement. Organizational and political factors may influence the system requirements. That is one more thing. And always there are chances where the organizational and political factors may influence the system requirements. Say, for example, if I consider the example of developing an social media application, like something similar to Twitter or Facebook. Now, as you know, that there are a lot of issues going on against these digital platforms, social media, isn't it? It's like what feature to give, what feature to not provide, isn't it? What features to be provided, what not to be provided. If at all you want to provide, what are the constraints to be imposed on them? All such things are very important. So the hence organizational and the political factors may also influence the system requirements. As you know, in case of Facebook and Twitter, government has given clear guidelines about how they have to deal with the users, and they are supposed to have some officials like with whom the users can register their queries. So that is grievance cell, isn't it? They are supposed to establish one grievance cell. Otherwise, in case if they do not comply with that rules, so such social media sites will be banned, isn't it? For that, even the government of India has given guidelines. So therefore, always the political factors, there are chances where the political and organizational factors may influence the system requirements. The requirements change during the analysis process. The requirements change during the analysis process, isn't it? So during analysis, we may exclude some of the requirements or we may add few more requirements, isn't it? Because uh, that's what the meaning of analysis, isn't it? When we do analysis, we may accept certain requirements or we may reject certain requirements. Chances are chances are always there. New stakeholders may emerge and the business environment may change. Say, for example, now you have some set of stakeholders. Now let us assume now one more category of new stakeholders are adding. So as a result, obviously there may be some changes in the requirements document. Because of addition of new stakeholders, there may be certain changes in the requirements document. So those are the problems with requirements elicitation. Now look at this diagram. This diagram shows the process of requirement elicitation and analysis. That means the process always starts with requirements discovery. So how to do the requirements discovery? By discussing with the various stakeholders of the system, you can discover the new requirements. Then second step is requirements classification and organization. That means once you collect requirements from various stakeholders, then you can categorize them into domain requirements, system requirements, user requirements, functional, non-functional, and so on. So that is requirements classification and organization. Then next step, requirements prioritization and negotiation. So how to do requirements prioritization and negotiation, that is very important. So to do this activity, we need to talk to the customer. So and we need to ask him what is his priorities, what are to be implemented as part of first iteration. So then you give high priority to them, and for other requirements you can give least priority. Why? Because they will be implemented in the coming iterations. So if there are any negotiations about including and excluding the requirements, that also can be done. So during this third phase, then the fourth phase is requirement specification. That is preparing the requirements documentation for a given iteration. That is the last phase. So now same thing is been explained in these slides. Requirements discovery. Okay. Now, so and during this course of time, so we will interview various stakeholders. So we need to understand what kind of interviews will be conducted to gather more information as part of requirements discovery. Formal or informal interviews with stakeholders are part of requirements engineering process. RE processes means requirement engineering processes. Types of interviews. Closed interviews based on predetermined list of questions. Say closed interview means, say for example, you'll go to the client's place, client's office, you'll meet the client, and before going there, you'll be preparing a set of questions, so that by asking those questions, you may get information about what are the requirements of the client. So such questions will be asked to the client or the customer. So that is called closed interview. And another one is open interviews, where various issues are explored with stakeholders. That means by having casual talk with the interview with the various stakeholders like managers, the person, the people who will be maintaining the software systems, and uh, end users and the managers. By discussing with such people, so just by having a casual talk, you can collect certain information about what are the requirements, what are the constants under which they are going to work, what kind of hardware setup they are going to have to install to host this project. So um, like that they'll ask various questions, and such an interview is called as open interview. Then, what is the effective interviewing? So, effective, how to conduct effective interviews? Be open-minded, avoid preconceived ideas about the requirements, and are willing to listen to stakeholders. That means, so you should be open-minded so that you can accept the new ideas. What, if at all, if anybody gives new ideas during the discussion with the client or any stakeholder, you have to accept. And you should have like, so during that process you should have some like pre-thoughts, like, so this is only the requirement should be there, this is only we need to convince the customer. So such thoughts should not be there, and you must be willing to listen to the stakeholders. See, when the task is all about collecting the information, you are supposed to listen to the stakeholders very patiently, and you can interview them about, so why those services are required. If they say some services are required, so you can ask them why such services are required, and how you are going to consume those services. And you can also ask them the type of interfaces that they need, whether they need command line interfaces, or whether they need web-based interfaces, or any specific type of interfaces. Such information is very important. Prompt the interviewee to get discussions going using a springboard question a requirements proposal, or by working together on a prototype system. So that means, so during this process, requirements may be collected in the form of question by asking some questions which are already listed, which you have listed to ask the clients to gather more information about the requirements, how they are going to use the system, what kind of services they may be needed, and what is the nature of the business that they are running. Right? So, what are the interviews that are in practice? In practice, actually, it's a mix of both closed and open-ended interviews. Interviews are good for getting an overall understanding of what the stakeholders do and how they might interact with the system. Through the interviews, it will give you an wholesome idea about what are the needs of the customers, what kind of application they are willing to have, and how it should be implemented. And interviewers need to be open-minded without preconceived ideas of what the system should do. See, before collecting the requirement, being an interviewer, you are not supposed to have some pre-thoughts. Requirements should be like this. You should not. You're not supposed to imagine something like that. You need to prompt the user to talk about the system by suggesting requirements rather than simply asking them what they want. Then, what are the problems with interviews? Application specialists may use language to describe their work that is not easy for the requirements engineer to understand. Sometimes they may tell the requirements in a manner which is not so easy for you to understand. That means, say for example, you are the business analyst, you are interviewing your customer to gather the information, isn't it? To gather the information about the requirements. So if they are, say for example, if you are talking in some, say for example, some regional language in which you are not good at, so therefore that is the point where, as an business analyst, you feel so very difficult to document the requirements. Then interviews are not good for understanding domain requirements. Requirements engineers cannot understand specific domain terminology. See, unless you are not an expert in that domain, it becomes very difficult for you to document the requirements. Say, for example, um, let us assume you are a business analyst and you are working on a retail domain. But for your second project, for your bad luck, you are sent to gather information from one of the bank manager to develop some software for their bank. Now, what is your situation? So earlier you worked on retail domain and you don't have sufficient knowledge on banking domain. Then you will go to the bank and you will talk to the manager to fetch more information about the requirements. So sometimes if you use some terminology, which is a banking terminology, so that's the point where you feel it difficult to digest what he's talking. So that means domain knowledge is very much essential while interviewing. Some domain knowledge is so familiar that people find it hard to articulate or think that it is not worth articulating, isn't it? So there are chances where if they use some terminology to tell the requirements, so and if you do not understand, so you may feel so that maybe that requirement is not like you may miss documenting that requirement, and it may be become very difficult for you to articulate more about that particular requirement. Say for example, if he says, so my software should be able to generate fund flow statements for every quarter, say for example, like that. So if that is the one of the requirement, if you don't know what is the meaning of fund flow statement, then how you are going to articulate that requirement, isn't it? Being a requirements engineer or being a business analyst, that is the point where you miserably fail to articulate that particular requirement. So therefore, so before any company is sending their requirements engineer or a business analyst to any of the customer, they need to make sure the person whom the company is sending is having sufficient domain knowledge. Now come to the one of the major concept, ethnography. Students, if you see any previous question paper, one there will be one common question. Most of the times, if you take some 10 software engineering question papers, out of 10, some at least some 7 question papers will be having one question on ethnography. So ethnography is a concept, and it's a study actually. Basically, it's a type of study. And let us see what it is. A social scientist spends a considerable time observing and analyzing how people actually work. People do not have to explain or articulate their work. Social and organizational factors of importance may be observed, and ethnographic studies have shown that work is usually richer and more complex than suggested by simple system models. See, that means, say, if you want to learn something just by observing and working with the people, and then such a study is called as ethnography. Say, for example, you are willing to develop some banking software. Okay, let us assume like that. Say, for example, one of the bank is already using such as one such similar software. Then your task is to go to the bank and to mingle with the people, and you see how people are using that system, what kind of interface it contains, and for what purpose they are using, and how the system is responding to the queries posed by the users. So if you observe and if you learn, and we call it as such a study is called as ethnography. So then we need to understand when we have to do ethnographic study. Say for example, your company is developing an internal tool. Do you do ethnographic study for that? No, that is not required. Say for example, your company is developing one social media application which is similar to Facebook. Then obviously you have to do the ethnographic study, because who are all the end users of Facebook? See, your company is also building one application which is similar to Facebook. So therefore, you need to assume, say, uh, so then who are all the end users of the Facebook? Isn't it common man? So how the people are using in the um, Facebook in the society? Say, for example, in rural area, how the people are using, what for they are using. So how the corporate people are using Facebook, what they are doing. Okay, and how the companies are using Facebook. See, some of the companies will give ads, isn't it? Facebook ads. So that means there are so many applications. So there are so many users of Facebook for so many people. See, some people they use Facebook simply to post their pictures and their messages, and some people use it to see the videos, and some people use it to text messages to their friends, and some business organizations use it an effective tool to market their product by launching suitable campaigns using the Facebook, isn't it? So such things should be observed. Okay, such things should be observed by observing how different stakeholders are using the application for their purpose. Then let us see what is the scope of ethnography. Requirements that are derived from the way that people actually work rather than the way in which process definitions suggest that they ought to work. Requirements are derived from cooperation and awareness of other people's activities. That is, awareness of what other people are doing leads to changes in the ways in which we do things. Then, see, if you look at this all these paragraphs, what is the one thing in common? So, see, just simply imagining something about, say, for example, see, many people doesn't know that even you can use Facebook for campaigning, and you can use Facebook for fundraising, isn't it? And even you can host a shop within the Facebook. You can create your own page and you can start selling the items, isn't it? There are so many use cases of Facebook. So therefore, so it is possible to understand such things only if you meet various users of Facebook, and if you explore what for they are using and how they are using and in what way it is useful for them and to what extent it is useful for them and what are the demerits, isn't it? So such things can be learned only by observation and by working with such people. Ethnography is effective for understanding existing processes but cannot identify new features that should be added to a system. Look at this last point. Ethnography is effective for understanding existing processes. So actually what is happening? Say for example, now your intention is to build one application similar to Facebook. So now you are doing the survey how Facebook is being perceived by the people. Then so it will give you an idea about understanding about the existing processes, but cannot identify new features that should be added to a system. See now, if you talk to people about Facebook, they'll tell you so what are the how they feel about Facebook, and very rarely, very few people may tell. So some of the feature is not there. That if they add it to the Facebook, that will be even better, like that. So very difficult to come out with such new requirements. Then one more concept is called as focused ethnography. Okay, let us see what is focused ethnography. Focused ethnography first developed in a project studying the air traffic control process. That means the concept of focused ethnography was first implemented in one of the project that was related to air traffic control. It combines ethnography with prototyping. That means, say for example, a company has deployed one person to conduct ethnographic study. So that fellow, what he will do? So before going, see, ethnographic study means so you mingle with the end users, you also be one among them, and you interact with them. You just observe what they're how they're using the system, for what they are using the system. During the course of time, you will be taking some questionnaire about. So if I ask these questions to the end users, I may get some information about so what are the requirements, so how we need to uh, design an system which will have very good impact on the end users, like that. Okay, so then after the end of the ethnographic study is like you will get answer for all your questions. Then you will come to know how the people are using and why such an application is needed for the people. Then based upon that, if you build a prototype, so this is how the system should be built. Say for example, you will build one GUI. Say for example, you will conduct one ethnographic study about how people are using Facebook. Then based upon that, how the new software should be built. If at all when you are building a new application which is similar to Facebook, how the GUI should look like. For example, you will prepare one prototype of that. That is called focused ethnography. So when the ethnography is combined with the concept of prototyping, we call it as focused ethnography. Ethnography. Once again, I repeat, when the ethnography process is combined with prototyping concept, then we call it as focused ethnography. Prototype development results in unanswered questions which focus the ethnographic analysis. So when you develop the prototype, it will also pose some of the newer questions which are unanswered and which will focus on ethnographic analysis. So to get the result, if you want to fetch the answer for those unanswered questions by looking at the prototype, then carefully you need to do the analysis of that ethnographic study, whatever you have done. The problem with ethnography is that it studies existing practices which may have some historical basis which is no longer relevant. So whenever we conduct any ethnographic study, basically we'll be conducting study on the existing system. See, what you are going to develop is a proposed system. To develop that proposed system only you are doing the ethnographic study. So therefore, whenever you do ethnographic study, you will study the existing practices and you will be studying about the existing systems, which may have some historical basis, which is no longer relevant. Sometimes, okay, so those things may not be relevant for your proposed system. Okay, sometimes those things may not be more relevant to your proposed system. Now look at this diagram. It is about ethnography and prototyping for requirement analysis. First is ethnographic analysis. So the first step is ethnographic analysis. See, ethnographic analysis means, say after doing the ethnographic study, you'll be preparing a report. You need to analyze that report. Okay, that report contains information such as, so how the existing system works, who are all the major stakeholders of that system and how they are using it, what for they are using it. Okay, is it beneficial for them or not? Such information will be inside that ethnographic study. Okay, that report. You need to do the analysis. That is called ethnographic analysis. Then debriefing meetings. Okay, so where to conduct these debriefing meetings? So debriefing meetings will be conducted with the project team within the company. See, after conducting the ethnographic study, we will go and he will meet the requirements team in their organization. So part of that team will be the business analyst, requirements engineer, and the project manager, and few other people. Along with them, we need to share his findings. So I conducted a ethnographic study. So this is the report. So this is the outcome. So I met all the stakeholders, and this is my feedback. Okay, based upon that, the development team will prepare the prototype. They'll think about preparing the what prototype. So that is called focused ethnography. So I have already told focused ethnography means when you combine the outcomes of ethnography to prepare a prototype, then it becomes focused ethnography. So the whole purpose of focused ethnography is to prepare a system prototype, so that by see it will help you to have, so that will create new questions in your mind. So that means you can discover new requirements. So it becomes easy for you. Say, if I design the website like this, okay, you just come up with a prototype. Okay, if I design the website like this, whether it will be attractive to the users or not, whether it looks like user friendly or not, that means it becomes easy for you to make a decision. See, that is the reason why before building the whole house, your engineer, civil engineer, will give you the blueprint of your house. Okay, so they'll tell, so the ground floor contains car parking, water sump, and so on, and like that, isn't it? So that will give you an idea. So as per the plan of the engineer, so how this house will come. So based upon that blueprint or the plan, you can suggest a few changes to the engineer, isn't it? So where the kitchen should come, where the veranda will come, where the balcony should come, isn't it? So all such things. So similarly here also, the prototype development for any software project is also very much important, so that you can evaluate the system in the early stage. And whatever the prototype that you are going to design, that is called as the generic system development. That is part of generic system development. That means the same prototype can be reused again. That's why it is called as generic system development. That is part of generic system development. Okay, now at the end, students, one thing I want to convey. So ethnography is a study. The purpose of ethnography is to understand uh, the requirements of the various stakeholders, and it focuses on existing processes. That is the one of the limitations of ethnographic studies. It always focuses on existing processes. So based upon existing processes, once you understand whether the existing processes are very much user friendly or not, okay, so that will give you an idea about how to design the proposed system. Then another thing, very important thing is, say in interviews, they may ask you the question, give me an example, give me an example project in which you may have to do ethnographic study. So the best answer is, say we need to do ethnographic study where, say for example, public, where the people within the society, all the people within the society is using the application. So for example, WhatsApp or Facebook. When developing such similar applications, obviously we need to do ethnographic study so that we can understand. When I say people within the society, see there are some people who are IT people, so how they are using Facebook, what for they are using Facebook. Okay, similarly, how an household mother is using Facebook, how the teenagers are using the Facebook. Hmm? Like that. So and how the corporates are using the Facebook and what for they are using the Facebook. Such inform to gather such information, like these studies are very very important. So therefore that is part of requirements discovery. Ethnographic analysis is, or ethnographic study is part of requirement elicitation or requirement discovery. So they have given one example, okay, here. So scenarios, stories and scenarios. Scenarios and user stories are real life examples of how a system can be used. Stories and scenarios are a description of how a system may be used for a particular task. Because they are based on practical situations, stakeholders can relate to them and can comment on their situation with respect to the story. So they have given one example for that you can learn. Okay, this is for just for your purpose. Okay, this I'll leave it to you. Photo sharing in the classroom. That's the name of the application is I Learn. Okay, so this is one example that you need to study for ethnography. How to discover new requirements. Next thing is requirement specification. Requirements, what is requirement specification? See the final document in which you have documented all the requirements and you have categorized them, you have organized them, and you have the final outcome. That is called requirements specification document. Okay, first let us see what is requirement specification. The process of writing done the user and system requirements in a requirement document. Then we call it as requirements document. So that means all the user requirements and system requirements are written in the form of a document that is called requirements document. User requirements have to be understandable by end users and customers who do not have a technical background. Okay. So when you document requirements, those user requirements must be easily understandable by the end users. Who are end users? See, after deploying the software in the client place, who are all the people going to use the system, or who are all the people going to use that software? They are all called as end users. User requirements have to be understandable by end users and customers who do not have a technical background. That means even though they don't have technical knowledge, then also they should be able to understand the user requirements and they should be able to work efficiently with the software. So like that you need to document the requirements. System requirements are more detailed requirements and may include more technical information. See, system requirements must be detailed. Why? Because then only the developers can implement it very efficiently and completely. And it should also contain more technical information so that implementation can be done easily by the developers. The requirements may be part of contract for the system development. So therefore, getting the requirements may be the part of the software contract for the system development. That is also true. And at the same time, we should also know that students, even the requirements documents is also very much essential for the test engineers and the QA team, that is quality assurance team. So whenever they want to test the application, first they should have clarity about what to test. So they will come to know what to test by looking at the requirements document. They will come to know what is to be tested. So therefore, it is not not only very much essential for the developers. It is also very much essential for the testers also. Now let us see what are the different ways of writing the system requirement specification. The very first option is natural language. So example of natural language is English language. So you can, by using the English as a language, you can write some user stories and scenarios. So that may be one type of requirement. That means that is one way using natural language. Then structured natural language. The requirements are written in natural language on a standard form. That means you are writing in English only, but there is some way of writing it, some way of categorizing the requirements, some way of writing in a specified manner. We call it as structured natural language. Each field provides information about an aspect of the requirement. Say for example, so one can be user requirement and another can be system requirement, okay, and another can be domain requirement. For example, just it's an example I'm telling. Then design description languages. Let us see what are design description languages. This approach uses a language like a programming language, but with more abstract features to specify the requirements by defining an operational model of the system. This approach is now rarely used, although it can be useful for interface specifications. So design description languages are very rarely used. That means for example, using a programming language to depict the requirements. So actually, it is very rarely used because of that reason. So how many can understand the programming language? Isn't it? Not everyone. So therefore, that is not a good choice. Using design description language is not a good choice. So what is the another option, that is graphical notations. Graphical models supplemented by text annotations are used to define the functional requirements of the system. UML use case and sequence diagrams are commonly used. See, this is acceptable. Okay. So that is one of the common method where we use UML, that is Unified Modeling Language, to document the object oriented design. So to depict the functional requirements, we can use always graphical notations. Next is mathematical specifications. These notations are based on mathematical concepts such as finite state machines or sets. Although these unambiguous specifications can reduce the ambiguity in a requirements document, most customers don't understand a formal specification. They cannot check that it represents what they want and are reluctant to accept it as a system contract. See, using mathematical notation specifications is fine. Okay, say for example, so when any person writes a research paper, they use a lot of mathematical notations to document their requirements and to depict their solution also. So that is understandable only to the technical guys, but not to the customers. So in case if you go with mathematical specifications, it looks nice, but it may become difficult for the customers to understand whether you are showing what is required for the customer or something else. Okay, so therefore, what is the popular choice? Natural language. Okay, the number one choice is always natural language is very much used. That is a popular thing which is used to document the requirements. Students, we'll stop it here. We'll continue tomorrow. One minute. Students, answer for the attendance. Yes and one.
Yes, sir.